I dedicate this episode to my daughter, Emma. From the day you were born and every day since, you've inspired me to be a better person. The FNRad Snowboard Podcast is presented by Vans. Season 7 of FNRad is sponsored by Wired Snowboards, the Boardroom Snowboard Shop, Anon Optics, Timebomb Trading, the Canadian distributor of Stance, 32 Dragon, and much more, and Tribute Board Shop in Nelson, BC. Wired Snowboards offers 10 different board series with a variety of shapes and sizes to accommodate everybody. Plus, you can order custom handmade snowboards to suit your personal style and preference. This week I rode Rob's own 159 Carbon Beast with a carbon fiber sidewall. This is one of the benefits of owning your own snowboard factory. Rob and Pepe are constantly coming up with new ideas and trying them out on the snow. The Carbon Beast isn't in the lineup yet, but it's the edge of innovation at Wired Snowboards, a true Canadian snowboard company with deep roots and amazing products. Check out wiredsnowboards.com and order a one-of-a-kind custom snowboard today. You'll be stoked. Support also comes from Grouse Mountain, Mount Seymour, New Green Superfood Drink, Volcom Outerwear, GoPro, and Intuition Custom Boot Liners. Sam Bertolino is a snowboarder from Long Island who spent years working for Burton. Along the way, Sam spoke up about equity in the workplace and bringing representation of marginalized groups into the culture and marketing campaigns of the largest snowboarding company on the planet. Her work on the Family Tree line was a part of creating one of the first gender-neutral series of Burton snowboards ever. I originally reached out to Sam because I'd heard that she sparked the end of Terrier's career. Enter my implicit biases. So I kind of called her with a real, do you know what you've done kind of attitude. But Sam's clear-headed explanation of her experiences at Burton made me realize I've been apologizing for Terrier since I first saw his tweet about Gus Kenworthy coming out as gay in 2015, and it's time for me to rethink that stance. I thought I'd share her story with you here on the show. I started by asking her if she considers herself an activist.
No, I mean, I would say I speak up when I hear something wrong, but am I a career activist? No, there's tons of people who do way more than I do. I think I hold privilege in the sense that I am white, I am cis, and I'm typically well-spoken. I would say better in writing than speaking, so don't hold me to it. But I think I can be well-spoken, and even at Burton, like I had access to, important people there, and I had some clout, I had a cool job, I'm decent at snowboarding, and, that was privilege. So in that sense, I was able to speak up and know I would be heard, whereas some other people wouldn't. So, I did feel some responsibility to speak up for people with less privilege than me, but, for myself as well.
Cool. So now, let's go back to Sam Bertolino starting snowboarding. Like, where were you? Where did you live? What era of snowboarding was it?
So I grew up on Long Island, and I started skiing in Vermont at Mount Snow when I was 3.
Wow.
And I think around, I was trying to remember this, but I think around when I was like 8, I was like, the snowboarding thing seems cool. I like to skateboard. I want to try snowboarding. And my dad was kind of bummed. I think he was bummed just because I was a pretty decent skier because I'd been doing it for so long, and just going through the learning process with your kid again is kind of annoying. But super supportive. I remember going to the local ski snowboard shop and where we would get our season rentals, and we started doing like double getting skis and snowboards.
Nice.
And eventually I got to the point where I was like, all right, I'm done with skiing and I'm just going to snowboard. And I think I was around 11 or 12. And then I started really getting into it in like middle school, high school. And what time and period was this? This was like the late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah. So what's your first board like that you buy?
Yeah. So my first board was a Burton Feel Good ES. I remember just looking up the classic, like, what's the best women's snowboard? And that was the board that Kelly Clark rode. And it was like, oh, this is the board that I need. And I think at that time I was already working at a snowboard shop. That may have been just before, but I think I was able to get my first job year like 14.
Wow.
So I started working at that same snowboard shop, ski shop, where would get my rentals. And so I may have even had a pro form or got a discount, got
Nice.
the Bertolino VDS, and it was like a 152 for perspective. I ride like 146 to 149 now. So I had this like massive stiff camber snowboard that I would just bomb at Mount Snow.
Rad. And so then throughout the years you stayed working at the shop, and did you ever like kind of get like compete or get sponsors or anything like that?
No, I mean, in my world, it wasn't surrounded by the snowboard industry, or it wasn't very relevant. I mean, we were just on Long Island, and I was, lucky to be able to take trips to Vermont because my dad and parents were pretty into it. So no, I never competed or anything like that. I also had to get a lot of knee surgeries throughout high school, so I was kind of always on crutches. But I stayed working at that shop on Long Island throughout high school. And then even in college, I went to college in Colorado, and I would go back over holidays and pick up shifts there. So kind of was this a constant spot.
What'd you take did you go to University of Colorado?
Yeah, I went to University of Colorado in Boulder.
Do you know Jake went there?
I did.
Yeah, that's kind of cool.
I think my time even overlapped with George a bit.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, but I actually only applied to UVM in Vermont and CU Boulder.
Yeah.
Because I was like, all right, where can I snowboard? And I ended up committing to Vermont. And then last minute was like, you know what, I'm going to go to CU because the mountains are bigger and the sun is out more, which ended up being great. And I majored in anthropology and communication.
Cool. So how do you get the job at Burton with that?
So while I was at CU, I snowboarded a lot, made my schedule. So I had like Monday, Wednesday, Fridays off. And I did the snowboard team, I think freshman and sophomore year. And I wasn't competing. I really just did it because I didn't have a car, and they had a van, and you paid $5 and you got to ride to the mountain.
Nice.
So that was great. And, just making friends. I started working at a Christie's Sports while I was in college. So just another shop. And then after school, I moved back to Long Island with a U-Haul. And after about 2 months, I was like, oh my God, what am I doing? How am I back here? And I just remember searching jobs on Indeed and keyword like snowboard, keyword Burton, and the Burton store in Vail popped up. And I went and worked at the Vail store and lived in Vail for 3 years. Wow. Which was awesome. And that was where I really just got to snowboard all the time. And that was amazing, just getting to snowboard almost every day and work and just sling snowboards and talk shop. And then from there, the Burton reps in the Rockies, so Colorado, New Mexico, had a big presence in Vail. So I made a conscious decision to really get in with them, and they were all rad anyway. So it was kind of like natural friendships were formed, and the US Open just started getting hosted in Vail. So we'd have people from in-house in Vermont coming out all the time. And it was pretty calculated. Like I showed up to demos. I would take paid days off of work from the shop to go volunteer at the Burton Girls tent just to show face and make connections and network. And it ended up working out. I ended up getting a job with the rep crew. And then that was awesome. Learned a ton. Yeah, continued to meet people and network. And then from there, I was loving being a rep, loved living in Denver. We had access to a house in Vail through my boss. So I was in Vail snowboarding all the time. Wow. And working. And I saw a post the job opening for assistant product manager for snowboards in Vermont. And I was like, damn, this is it. Like, I don't want to leave Denver. I was in a new relationship, loved my job, loved Colorado. But of all the jobs that could have pulled me in, that was it. And one thing kind of led to another. And before I knew it, I was interviewing, and then I got the job, and then it was off to Vermont, which was a big change, but it was awesome.
Rad. So your day to day becomes designing snowboards. Is that right?
So yeah, so I was on the product management team for hard goods. So there were 4 of us. And I wouldn't say necessarily designing, because I think a lot of people then think, graphics or engineering. But it's more so like you're the hub of the wheel. You really coordinate everything from line planning of like, okay, what kind of snowboards do we need at which price point and why? Who's the customer? What kind of board does that customer want? Working with engineers to develop something that fits that persona, then giving direction to the creative team to design something that fits that persona. And then once the product is made, then working your way through informing sales and marketing. Hey, this is what we made, why? And, working through the whole cycle of the product. So it's more than a project manager or coordinator, because you have say and strategy and decision making. But you really get to touch, all aspects of the process. And it was great. I mean, I learned a ton, and there was a moment where I was like, damn, I really should have studied something a little bit more focused as far as like engineering or creative or design or something like that, because it's much easier to look for a job when you know the keyword you want.
Yeah,
but
totally.
I was looking for something a little bit more broad, and this kind of answered to all of that. And my majors in college had to do with people and culture and how people communicate and things like that. And I think that really helped me with market understanding. And yeah, it was great. And, you've been to the Vermont office. So, I think you mentioned, when you were there going and getting to see like all that future product in the hard goods room.
Oh, it was so sick. Yeah. It's just nuts. Yeah. I thought it was awesome.
Yeah. So my desk, I was in the hard goods room. So you're surrounded by future product, by legendary product on the walls, and, legends in the room with you, JG a couple desks away. And it's, it was a really awesome environment just to be in. Like, you'd just be doing your work, and, sometimes Jake would be walking through, or, Donna's, always around. And it was a really, really great atmosphere. And you definitely felt like you were surrounded by snowboarding.
How long were you at that job?
That job, I believe, was 3 years.
And how long before you noticed that there was something off about the work environment?
I mean, I think that's a tough question. I think inherently everything that we're surrounded by right now is off. I mean, things aren't equal. And I mean, I drove across the country for that job with my now wife, but girlfriend at the time. And there were many times and many places where we didn't feel comfortable holding hands. And, not just because we didn't feel comfortable, but like, is this a risk? Like, are we safe? If is something bad going to happen to us if we are outwardly gay right now? So, when you're part of a marginalized group, whether, it's gender, sexuality, race, or anything, even just being a woman, and I think you're in tune to this stuff anyway. So I think going into any scenario, that these inequities exist, and you're going to be, so you're privy to it. So I wouldn't say there was like a moment where I was like, oh man, like it's not good. I mean, I think I kind of had my eye on it anyway, because, you have to. I was one of like 3 women in hard goods. It's like 30 people. I mean, I think the inequities are around you all the time. You're kind of seeing it. So I wouldn't say there was like an aha moment of that, but I will say that like anytime something did happen, I always found myself being the one to kind of speak up. And I think that was because when I showed up to that office for that job, I already knew most of the people, like just from being a rep before. So I was comfortable there. Like these are my people. This is what I like to do. I've spent years formulating relationships here. So I had a bit of comfort in, who I could email. Mm-hmm. And I had a cool job, hard goods product. If something happened that I didn't agree with or necessarily think was right, I would say something, and not in a way to yell at you, be like, you did this wrong. I mean, I would say that too, but also like, hey, we're a global leader here. Let's do better. We have a really great opportunity to do something great here. And I think my moment where I stopped being really hopeful about those kinds of emails and started getting more frustrated was when it didn't feel like anything was happening. I'd say something and maybe I'd get pulled into a group to review something with a diversity and inclusion lens. And then I would be like, actually, I'm glad I'm here because this isn't really great. Mm-hmm. Like, here's this women's catalog that you're thinking about. And I don't see any Black people or people of color, or I don't see any representation of a queer family or different body sizes, and then, getting shot down. So it's like, I took time away from my job, making fun product, to come do this, which is emotionally distressing. And, taking away from me what I'm actually supposed to be doing, falling behind on my work to come put myself in this position that's going to raise my heart rate and upset me, tell you how you can do better. And then for you to not listen, that was the part where I'm like, oh, you're not even going to listen. Like, that was when I started, those were the hard moments. It was frustrating because would I have loved to have just been able to show up to work and just do my job and talk snowboards and not have to worry about that? Yeah, what a privilege. Like, that would be great. But instead, like, I'm having to do this thing where, some people may say, oh, you didn't have to do that. But, at the end of the day, it was, affecting me. It was affecting other people who had less of a voice. And yeah, it was tough.
So how early into it does the Terrier thing happen? Because that was like 7 years ago.
Yeah. So the Terrier thing, I think originally happened in 2015, 2 or 3 years before I got to Vermont, but it happened again. He did something else on Instagram. Yeah. And there's a post going around him calling something gay, and it's like, again? Right. Again? We're doing this again? Right. And, some people might say I'm a whistleblower here, but to be honest, I don't think I am. I mean, everyone already knew what he did the first time, and it was wrong then, and he was called out for it then. Like, I think the industry was the whistleblower. And, when it happened the second time, again, I wasn't the one who found it. It was on different people's Instagram stories. And, right. The role I had already taken about speaking up against things that I didn't think was right. And again, my access to important high up people. It's like, I'm going to say something, hey, just so you know, so you're aware, he did it again. And I just want there to be some internal pressure that, this isn't okay, and leave it at that. And, the response I get back is, hey, thank you so much for bringing this attention. This definitely doesn't align. And yeah, we'll look into it. And then silence for a couple weeks. And then the next thing, then I kind of forgot about it, heart rate goes down, and back to just talking snowboards, having fun. Yeah. And the next thing I think that comes across my desk, I was in some meeting, and it's the prepping to design the Terrier line. And that's
falling on your desk.
Yeah, like, I'm not the sole person responsible for it, but I'm in the meeting where we're like, hey, we're about to start working on this capsule for Terrier.
Do you think it was calculated, or do you think it was just bad timing or bad communication as a company?
Oh, I don't think it was calculated, like, oh, let's do this to make Sam mad. Like, I don't think it was necessarily calculated. Like, I'm sure it was something that was written in his contract. He gets a line. Mm-hmm. But I think it speaks more to the fact of, like, where are your priorities? if your priorities are, he has to align with your values in order to represent the brand, why is this even getting to the point where it's at my desk? Like, I shouldn't even have to say anything. I don't want to say anything. Like, you think I want to risk my likability, my promotability, emailing these high-powered people about this? This isn't what I want to be doing. Like, so I don't think it was calculated, but I also don't think it should have happened. It should have been put a stop to in 2015. And then again, it shouldn't have been able to get to that point.
Right.
In that moment, when that line kind of was being talked about, we were all sitting around the table. I was thankful because I actually wasn't the person who was like, hey, maybe we shouldn't be doing this. Someone else said it. And I was super thankful for him in that moment. And it kind of, enabled me to be like, yeah, like you're allowed to be upset about this. Like, this isn't cool. Even, the straight guy at the table is like, hey, maybe we shouldn't do this. That really shook me because I had said something like, hey, this isn't okay. And now you're telling me I have to work on making this line for him. And it just really kind of was a slap in the face of how much it wasn't cared about.
Throughout your time at Burton, were they ever saying like, look, this is a safe space for all people?
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, that's definitely the message that's put out there. And I think that was also empowering for me to be like, hey, this is a company who says they support me. I should be able to speak up, So yeah, that's definitely the messaging that they've always said. And, they continue to say, and I think, I'm not saying it's untrue or they don't mean it. I mean, I think they really do mean it, but there was just only so much I could take at my own expense of, them figuring out the right way to execute that. Right.
The responsibility doesn't fall on you.
Yeah. Like sometimes you want to just show up and like get to do what everyone else does and just, talk snowboarding and not have it be this thing. And there is some responsibility, when you are in a position of power to, speak up and create the space for the little kid who's thinking about maybe snowboarding to be like, hey, you're not alone here. There's other people. So, it kind of goes both ways. Yeah. And I feel like, I felt comfortable emailing who I did. And, maybe that's just because of who I am. But I didn't feel like there wasn't, space to bring it up. I mean, I always had a great manager and a great supportive team. And, there's tons of great people at that company. Like half of my friends still work at Bird. So I never felt like I really didn't have someone to tell. And I'm sure a few people could tell you that I told them. And I think it really just came down to the follow through and the action. And it's like, I don't know what conversations happened afterwards, or did they talk about it? Did they not talk about it? What was said? What decision was made and why? So I don't know. I think, it really came down to action and follow through.
Right. So eventually they let Terrier go, but they do it in the most ambiguous way. Some would say that it wouldn't have affected any positive change for someone who is out at work anyways. What he did was homophobic and shitty that hurt people's feelings. And then everybody rallied behind him saying it wasn't that bad. That's what it looked like to someone from the outside. And I was a part of that rally saying, you know what? How bad is it? When I called you, that was what my intention was to say, really, you thought it was that bad that you're going to get this guy, legend of all legends, canceled? And you schooled me right away.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple things going there. So like the first thing you said, like, it's not that bad. I think Tanner Pendleton in the Torment interview kind of hit it home in his description.
I'm just going to cut in here with my son Bowen reading the quote from Tanner Pendleton.
Yeah, so a microaggression is basically a low-key jab, whether intentional or not, at marginalized groups. An obvious example would be calling something you don't like gay, or saying something along the lines of, this spot sucks dick. Even something as simple as asking a guy, do you have a girlfriend, assuming their sexuality is considered a microaggression. I know some people might think that's overboard, but if you really think about it, what message does that tell a guy if he is gay? It tells them they're not normal. It may not seem like a big deal, but repeated microaggressions are actually really harmful and proven to be a leading cause of suicide in LGBTQ people. Also, this idea extends way beyond the LGBTQ community to women, people of color, etc. So I think microaggressions are really important to key in on, especially with the audience of this interview, because they are cultural issues that you can address and make a change for the better now. I think it's important to educate yourself on the matter and be mindful of what you think you're putting out in the world.
Language and how we talk about things, lays the foundation for how things are seen or people are treated. And, language can be used to join people together or separate. It can, create another. And then once you have that other, that's when you start seeing, violence or the disenfranchisement of groups, laws that come through this. So it does matter. Like, yes, it's just a word, it's just language, but like that results in harm and violence. And if you just look at statistically, trans people are facing way more violence, Black trans people, even more violence. So, this isn't just like, oh, it hurt my feelings. It's like, no, this is like creating this environment that enables these violent and hateful and life-threatening actions to take place. So, it's important. And he didn't just do it once, he did it again. And he never really seemed to learn why it wasn't okay. I think it's really important to drive that home, like why it is a big deal.
It was international news that he made this gay joke. It kind of denigrated down to where people were just fighting over how much punishment should this guy have for a joke. That's where it got to. Having gone through and listened to what I've said about it on the show, it's embarrassing.
Yeah, and here's a guy who's renowned as the greatest snowboarder of all time, working for, being sponsored by, representing the biggest snowboard company, the most influential snowboard company. So at the end of the day, it comes down to your employer. If you are representing, this company and your values and you're doing and saying things that don't align, like it's pretty black and white. And I am thankful, Burton, it seems like maybe a day late and a buck short, but they did realize. And, listening to your interview with Donna, I was happy to hear her say, yeah, he didn't align with our values, and that's important. It's pretty cut and dry.
Yeah, like I'm on your side on this one. If Burton says this is a safe space for everybody,
yeah,
then you're going to see LGBTQ, BIPOC, everybody would be represented.
Yeah.
But you don't see that there. Like, that was the biggest red flag for me.
Yeah, it's not the case. Vermont is not diverse. Snowboarding is not diverse.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's important to realize that historically, snowboarding and skate culture, it really, hasn't been, gay jokes have been so prevalent. It hasn't been the most welcoming environment, even though it, it wants to be. It isn't. And yeah, I think I told you, as far as I know, 700 people in an office, that number could be off, but I think it's right. It's kind of like a small high school. And there was rarely a person I passed in the hallway that I didn't know their name. So think of a small 700, because it really didn't feel big.
Yeah.
And of everyone I knew there, I could be wrong, but I don't think there was a single out gay man or any out trans people. There were a few lesbians that I know of, but not a single out gay man. What does that tell you about, the toxic culture, just like that snowboarding creates? Like, why don't these people feel welcome here? And, does the greatest snowboarder of all time continuing to call things gay in a derogatory way result in that? Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think it does. It creates this environment where people, although we can say it's a safe space, statistically, it doesn't line up with what a safe space would look like.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a big call out. And I think that's one of the things that I learned speaking with you. I was calling it the big cancel of Terrier, and I'm sure the media was calling it Terrier getting canceled by Burton.
He didn't get canceled, and most people don't get canceled. Like, you look at his recently tagged Instagram photos, there's still people being fans or sponsors. And did he lose a major sponsor because his values and he did things that didn't align? Yes. But did he get canceled? No. Was he held accountable eventually? Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think there's anything wrong with being held accountable when you can affect so much. And I think that's important to clarify.
He's not canceled. He was called out. And he wasn't even called out by you. You called out Burton. You're like, hey, Burton, if this is a safe space to work, why are you continuing to support riders that don't align with your values publicly?
Yeah, I mean, and let's be real. Like, I wasn't on the senior team. I didn't have decision-making power here. I was just like, hey, if this is your list of values and this is what you say you stand for, hey, I found something that doesn't align, that makes it hard for me to do my job. And, you know, he wasn't some ambiguous, Terrier, great snowboarder. You know, I sometimes would look up from my desk and there he would be a couple tables over talking boots or bindings or something, you know, with JG. Like, this was a guy who was in my line of sight, who I'd have to shake hands with, who, you know, ride around tables. You know, one of the coolest parts of my job, there was a moment, you know, while all this stuff is going on, and I'm told, hey, just so you know, Terrier's going to be in this ride around table Zoom call. If you don't feel comfortable doing it, that's totally okay. You can sit this one out. Now, you know, at first listen, that might sound like, oh, you know, that's so supportive of them, you know, but really, like, ride around table is one of the coolest things you get to do in my past job. You're talking product with the pros. You're talking about what they like, what they didn't like, what's coming for the future. What should we do? It's fun. And you're telling me that I should sit out if I'm going to feel uncomfortable because Terrier is going to be there. Like, I don't want to miss that. I don't want to fall behind in my job. I don't want to miss that opportunity. If he's the one who did something wrong and is making me feel unsafe, then he shouldn't be there. Why am I the one who is being told maybe you shouldn't be there? So, and, you know, even the intention there was good. It's like, hey, if this person's going to make you uncomfortable, you don't have to go. But ultimately, like, that position, that person who told me that shouldn't have even been in that position. Like, he shouldn't have been invited to that. He shouldn't have been, if his values didn't align, you know, he shouldn't have been on the team at that point.
Yeah, you got me with that one. When I first heard it, I was like, she's totally right on that. Why do you think it's so sticky? Like, when I spoke with Donna, she was really proud of their shit moment when they looked around and saw that women were underrepresented, and they worked on it. And why wouldn't they put that same sort of effort into this? Is it because it's too complicated, or, like, I don't understand? I
mean, I think it is the same phenomenon that happens all across society. I mean, there's the intersectionality of these issues in the sense of, you know, you want to attack just, let's do gender inequity, let's look for women, but you have to realize that people's other social identities that exist, or racial identities, they all add up and can compound against, you know, a person's place in society.
Yeah.
So one of the, you know, things I'm really excited about that I got to work on while I was at Burton was the family tree line being gender neutral. So in the last couple of years, it's been one family tree line, gender neutral, extended sizing amongst the boards. So in the past, you know, you'd maybe get like 1, 2, maybe 3 if you count a split board, women's boards, and then 8 to 10 or, you know, whatever, men's boards. And it was always kind of limiting, right? Like, I'd get, you know, 1 or 2 boards I get to ride from family tree, and the dudes would get all of these boards. And when you really think about, you know, being inclusive, sometimes it's not obvious. And some people were a little resistant, like, hey, we're going to remove women's from family tree. Like, that goes against our inclusivity. But, you know, it actually ends up being something that's even more progressive, right? Because now we are not holding the physical body to be attached to gender. So you're including more trans people. You're including more guys who may be small, or women who may be bigger. And you're actually being more progressive sometimes when you're not just focusing on women or gender. Because, you know, in the end, right, you have all these family tree boards now that have smaller sizes and big sizes, no gender attached to it. And everyone now has more boards. Like, I can ride every board in the family tree line, which I've never been able to do before. I'm sure there are cisgendered guys who maybe wear a size 7 boot or weigh 140 pounds and weren't able to ride family tree boards before, or, you know, women who have bigger feet and weigh a lot. So sometimes these criteria that we think we're holding ourselves to be more inclusive, if you're not thinking about intersectionality and the different identities, if you're not really thinking about the most marginalized groups, and if you reach for those more marginalized groups, trans people, Black people, you're going to swoop up everyone. So, in my head, I may have been thinking about trans people, and making the sizing more inclusive. But in the end, it helped cis people too. It helped, the cis people who fall out of the typical ranges. So it really is important to think about those most marginalized groups, and you're going to help more people. And I think it's, important to realize that you don't always realize the issues that don't affect you.
Mm-hmm.
And if Burton was ran by queer, disabled, Black, trans women, right?
Yeah.
Like, if those are the people on the senior team, the company would look so different. That, not just Burton, any company, if it was ran by that group of people, you wouldn't just be saying women. I think a lot of companies have great intentions, Burton included, and they're moving in the right direction, but it's all interconnected, and you really have to go the extra mile to think further about what can you do to get everyone.
Yeah, I feel that too. I brought up that Lululemon thing. I did look it up just so I am talking about it with a little bit of knowledge. Basically, they say we stand for humanity, diversity, empathy without exception. Their inclusion, diversity, equity, and action mission. So that's what the IDEA mission is. Anything in the IDEA realm can be brought all the way up to the CEO level. That is what they're committed to. And when I asked my friend, do you have an example of that thing working? He goes, I do. There are two girls at my work. One's Chinese, one's Korean. And they both separately brought the same issue to the IDEA committee, and that was that they were getting mistaken for each other at work. And so they went to the IDEA committee and they figured it out. And by the time that it reached my friend, these two women were making a presentation. Why am I crying? So these two women brought their stories about growing up outside of Canada and immigrating here and choosing names that were easier to say, and how disappointing it was that they couldn't even ask people to call them their real names. So by the end of the meeting, there was a handout on their traditional names and how to say them, and there was an expectation in the workplace to learn that. And I think that's a good example of being committed to that to me inspired me, that because I was stuck on this for the first week after I talked to you, thinking there's no way out of this, really. What do we do?
Well, yeah, creating a safe space to voice concerns is one thing, and I do feel like I had that. I mean, I sent a lot of emails that were risky to my, like I said before, my likability and promotability. And on one hand, I'm thankful that I never got fired for it. So in some sense, it is a safe space. Do I think I should have ever gotten fired for it? Absolutely not. But I think the issue comes with the follow through. And, what are you doing about what I just said besides asking me to speak up more, put in my input more? Because, you just got emotional, and it's good to get emotional about things that affect other people. And it's, even harder when it affects you. And when you're at your job, you're just trying to do your job, and you're being put in these positions where, you have to speak up and you lose focus. It was very hard for me to have those kinds of conversations and then get back to my desk and start putting things in Excel or whatever I was doing. And it was a bummer, honestly. I think about this a lot. I told you about my path to that job and, the path I took in snowboarding. And yeah, it was very calculated, networking, jobs I sought out, people I sought out, but it was a privileged path. I mean, those jobs that I was doing, even up into through Burton, were not well-paying jobs, barely livable. And I mentioned I had to take paid days off of work when I was at the shop to go. I didn't have to, but I took paid days off of work at the shop to go network and meet people. And that's the real reason why I got that job, is because I had already, been talking and meeting people and putting myself out there. and, working these low paying jobs and, working demos and showing up early. And, in order to be able to do that, and even to have my job at Burton, my dream job when I made it, not really making livable money, I was only able to do all of that and even get introduced to snowboarding in the first place because I am privileged, and I knew that my parents would help me if I couldn't make a rent payment, or I would never be without food or shelter. And if that's the path that people have to take to get that job, like, you're not going to have a very diverse workplace because not the many people have that privilege, and the people who do have that privilege tend to all look the same. And, even if you can find someone who maybe doesn't need to know snowboards and work in snowboard product, someone who's going to work in IT or finance or even sales or anything, really, marketing, any job. And if you're not going to pay competitive wage, it's the same scenario. The kind of people who can afford to work low paying jobs are those privileged groups. And, I think the draw of like, oh, well, you can snowboard, you can wear jeans and a t-shirt, you can bring your dog to work. I think a lot of that is more obsolete. I mean, especially now with remote work, but even in the last 10 years with tech jobs coming up and same casual work environment, I mean, that's more of a standard now. It's not really a benefit in a lot of jobs. So I think the pay is huge. Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
I was actively applying for jobs. Yeah. And when I got one, I left with a go out in flames email, as I call it. Yeah. Just kind of a final, like, these are some things that were not that rad, and you have such an opportunity to do better. And if you're still supporting Terrier, shame on you, really. I had the privilege in that moment. I didn't need that job anymore. And I'm going to say, one last time, this is what you really should be doing to do better.
Holy moly. The amount of emotional heavy lifting that you've done on this issue, for free is a lot.
Even the first question you asked me, are you an activist? Or people in my time at Burton being like, oh, wow, you're so well-spoken, you're so passionate about this. And it's ironic because no, I'm not. Like, I don't want to be passionate about being marginalized or other groups being marginalized more than me. Like, I'm passionate about snowboarding. I didn't want this to be my legacy, like, this is not the kind of podcast I would, if you told me 5 years ago that I was going to be doing with you, I would be bummed. Like, my passion is snowboards and product. Like, it's not this. Yeah. And it's unfortunate that I had to be passionate about that in order to make my job more doable, or just like my own comfort and safety. It's unfortunate. I never felt like I was, alone in the battle. Whether it was like while I was sending feisty emails or speaking up about things, I always had people to bounce it off of who were like, yeah, you should totally say that. Like, that's right. Like, even before I sent my email, I ran it by people, or even after my email was sent, I got so much support back from people, like important, cool people, or, rad people who I admired. So it's okay to make mistakes. Like, that doesn't get you written off. Like, I think the issue comes is when you make mistakes and you continue to make them after being told it was wrong, and you continue to defend it and you don't do anything about it to learn. That's the real problem. And I think just no hard feelings. It didn't end the way that I would have hoped, but I think it's a good learning moment. And hopefully this helps clarify for some people and helps people to learn. And I think that I would have worked there forever. I mean, if the pay maybe was a little better, a lot better, and this stuff never happened, I would have worked there forever. It would have been very nice to not care and to just show up and make snowboards.
You are a really good dynamic speaker. I felt really excited about this for the last 3 weeks. So
I've had a mixture of excitement and nervousness. The only thing I forgot to give props to was my old boss, Leslie Betts, for being supportive and sick throughout the whole time. And it was, yeah.
Thank you for doing this.
Yeah, thank you.
FNRad shout-outs this week to Sam Bertolino for telling her story on mic and speaking up. As I've mentioned before, I'm on the first few steps of my journey towards being the kind of person I aspire to be. I want to thank Tanner Pendleton, Gus Kenworthy, Jake Kuzik, Jill Perkins, Chad Unger, Chelsea Waddell, and Kennedy Deck for doing the emotional labor for all of us in the snowboard community. And thanks to Torment Mag for doing the series of interviews with LGBTQIA2+ pro snowboarders. I'd like to mention Layla F. Sad for her work on educating the world about inclusivity. Her book, Me and White Supremacy, has helped me working through, that first step of trying to be more inclusive in my thinking. The podcast Seen on Radio has also been a big source of information and inspiration over the past 5 seasons. Check that out if you're looking for some information to bring yourself into the presence of your own implicit biases. I leaned on several trusted friends for help on this episode. Thank you, Andy, for the story of your experience at Lululemon. And thank you, everyone who listened and gave feedback. You know who you are. Special thanks to my ever-supportive wife, Terry Lynn. She is my rock. And as I said up front, this episode is dedicated to my daughter, Emma. I love you, kiddo. And special thanks to my son, Bowen, for reading the quote from Tanner's Torment Mag interview. I love you, son. You guys are the best people, and it's a real honor to be your dad. Be sure to come back next week for another episode of the FNRad Snowboard Podcast presented by Vans and brought to you by SIA Productions.